All right, environmental cleanup. To comply with the applicable federal, state, local, and Department of Defense requirement for the cleanup of the contamination, Army installation formerly used the defensive system, defensive sites, and depict differences of the commonalities among the various cleanup of the program areas. The oversee installation for the compliance related with the cleanup of the programs accomplish everly and contained with the public involvement and the cleanup programs. State and regulatory agency, the U.S. Department Agency of Protection Agency, informed with the cleanup programs as appropriate. Our defensive environmental restoration program has on the diaphragm sides the formerly used defensive site is in the defensive restoration program. In between the compliance and the related cleanup with the remediation oversees the active installation, access installation, special installations, while the defensive environmental restoration program has multiple military munition response program with base realignment closures of 88 and 91, 93, 95, and 05. 12.2. Legal and other requirements following the list of statutory requirements that apply with the environmental cleanup. Title 40 U.S. Standard Code 9601, Title 4300, Section 120, 1910 of the Title 29 Code of Regulations, Executive Order 1258, Title 49, 42 U.S. Standard Code 6901, Section 3004 UV and H. 3008 and Section 2701, Title U.S. Standard Code, Department of Defense, 1014 R, Department of Defense Infrastructure, and 4715.7, but oversees installations of Department of Defensive Instruction 4715.8, Engineer Regulation, formerly Youth Defensive System, Defense Site Program Policies, Charters from the formerly used Defensive Site Program to October 31st, 2003, of Office of Assistant Secretary of the Army Installation Environmental and Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Environmental Safety Occupational Health, Memorandum 18th June 2004, subject to the Army Environmental Compliance related with the cleanup program. Eligibility to Army Environmental Cleanup programs include the Army um, Defensive Environmental Restoration Plan, and active closing realignment installation for the Defensive Environmental Restoration Plan, and formerly used defense sites, properties, compliance related cleanup, and active excessive installation, including overseas regulations and permanently Army environmental cleanup programs, is referenced in Appendix A. Defensive Environmental Restoration Program, cleanups of the installation restoration program, military munitions response program, base alignment, closure of the funds, formerly used defensive sites, addressing hazardous substance pollution, contamination, military munitions sites consistent with the provision Title 42 U.S. Standard Code 9601, intent sequence. Circular Title 40 CFR 300 National Oil Hazardous Substance Pollution Contingency Plan, Executive Order 12580, 42 U.S. Standard Code 6901, Section 3004 UV and 3000H. 3008H activities resulted with the contained prior to the October 17, 1986 as a non-permitted site. Compliances related to cleanup addressed with the cleanup of the requirements for the are legally mandated with not eligible for funding with the Army Defensive Environmental Restoration Program. The program focuses on remediation contamination of the Army overseas facilities. It does not include the actions to remediate contamination that covered with the environmental annexes to operations orders or similar operational directives on cleanup of the contamination resulting from the operation that have been occurred with since 17th of October 1986. This includes sites of the active Army Reserves, Army National Guard, and federally owned facilities, as well as cleaning up the non-federal owned, federal supported state-owned, state-operated Army National Guard facilities. The the cleanup plans cleanup does not include initial response actions that address spills. Does not include the following response actions if Defensive Environmental Restoration Program is supplemented the Department of Defense Management Guide. The Defensive Environmental Restoration Program since September 2011. The Department of Defense Environmental Restoration Program Management Guide shows eligibility addressed and sites in the following three programs. The ARP includes the response to the actions address relief of the hazardous substance pollution contamination defined in circular petroleum oil lubricant. The Department of Defense unique materials, hazardous waste, low-level radioactive material, low-level radioactive waste. And IRP also includes the military munitions, including munitions explosive concern, or military munitions with explosive concern. See glossary. The munitions consistent with the munitions consistent or relatively small number of the site, but the following three conditions all exist. The release is occupied prior to the September 30th, 2000. The release of the site is not out of operational range of the activity range of munitions demilitarization facility activity, waste of military munitions treatment and disposable unit formerly used defensive site and identified with included the Armored Environmental Database for restoration or formerly used defense site management information system prior to the September 30th, 2000 September was classified as response complete. The MMRP addressed munitions responsibly active the BRAC installation where the release occurred prior to the September 30th, 2002. The release is a site of the formerly used defensive site operational range activity munitions militarized facility activate an active WMM treatment of disposal units operated with the September 30th September 2002. The site was identified and included with the ADB/R prior to September 30th September 2000. Building demolition debris are addressed with the demolition and removal of the unsafe building structure, facilities, and sites were owned with lease and otherwise proposed by the United States under jurisdiction of the Department of Defense. 12.3 major program goals. Perform appropriate cost-effective cleanup so that the property is safe for the Army youth transfer appropriate sustain the operation training that protects the human health and environment. Program requirements cleanup the program areas. All cleanup programs are a must. Identify the cleanup programs at the site level using the most stringent current with the projected future land as used, documented, installed with the master plan, developed with a reasonable schedule cost, complete cleanup of the record of liabilities database, record pursuing cleanup with the regulatory agreement with the site closure. Provide site level data in response with the assistant chief of the staff with the incident management and data calls for updates for the database for records. Develop, maintain, an administrative record for the national priority list and similar documentation for the non-national priority list and sites on the installation of the U.S. Army Corps Engineering. District responsibility for formerly use the defense system site. Prepare annually cost complete estimates for each site of the program to reflect the environmental strategy sequence for the presenting with the installation of action of the BRAC IAP and funds management action plan map. Maintain, audit, and trail with the changes that other that occur in the fiscal year that reflect the actions taken, change in the estimate, and new deleted requirements estimated must be based on the reliable, complete, with the fully documented will be in the consent of the year dollars. Public Law 101 576. Determine contamination, mitigation, garrison commanders must approve off-site data collection and off-site monitoring to ensure the contamination has been mitigated off-site. Notified DASA and the head ESOH through chain of command prior to initiating off-site response actions of Army authority to conduct the response for the actions outside of the installation boundary. However, the lack of the Army control over the off-site installation property, potential legal and technical complexity is sensitive and necessary for the increased public involvement and requirements. Additional oversight on these responsive notification requirements does not apply to the formerly used defensive sites. Must retain permanent documentation respiratory to ensure the cleanup information is available to tackle for ensure Army liability any date of the future. Document environmental response decision and circular record the decision on the equivalent decision document other or action memorandum prior to the conducting removal of remedial actions. Coordinate remedial documentation. National resource trustees work cooperatively with the regulatory agencies and Army to claim up with goals accomplished with the cost effectively in accordance with the applicable laws and regulation. Fully support the public involvement and with the cleanup of the programs where the potential impact on the health, environment, and economic will be in the local community. Maintain the inventory and maps of the land use control result with the responsive decision, active installation, and integrated with them into the installation master plan. Establish the procedure evaluating implemented remedies. Optimize an overall performance effectiveness of the remedy. Control operation maintenance cost of the remedy for the remedy operational phase. Assess whether the remedy actions objects specified by ROD of the Department of Defense will site whether they're being achieved, whether the treatment are still needed. Determine whether the different remedial actions are objective. The different technologies are appropriate for the Army Defense Environmental Restoration Plan. The DERP address of the site, the real property under the U.S. jurisdiction, custody, control of the Army to include active and access Army, U.S. Army Reserve installation facilities, federal owned, leased, and Army and National Guard installation activities and properties, contractors, activity lease, and other tenants for the Army installation facilities. The Army Defensive Environmental Restoration Program addresses contamination at the site of the active installation of the three categories described previously: IRP, MMRP, and DNR. Army is funded with the Department of Defense Environmental Restoration Program, the Installation Environmental Restoration Army, and the funds authorized approved appropriate specially executed by the Defensive Environmental Restoration Program. They actively installation of the ER Environmental Restoration Army is funds must be used for the restoration project for the approved AIP for the site of the EDB/R Title 10 U.S. Standard Code 2703. For the IRP category, conduct the screening for the capacity of the hazardous substance pollutant contamination for the potential contamination reassessment if appropriate, and an active and federally owned National Guard Bureau and Army National Guard installation sub-installation. Conduct these studies response in accordance with the annual IAP approved by the government garrison commander of equivalent established information respiratory administrative record to provide public aspects information and about the cleanup activities installation, establish the effective community involvement program to include the community relations plan for the national NPL sites of public involvement with the response of the plan Army installation active cleanup program. Negotiate a federal facility of the agreement and interagency agreement. The NAPL sites comply with the Department of Defense approved model agreement. Establish technical review committee restoration advisory when applicable to allow for local community opportunity to participate in remedy selection for the process of the review restoration advisory board at all BRAC installations with the closure involved with the transfer of property to the community unless otherwise determined by the Army Chief of Staff and Installation Management. At the installation of the NPL, the Restoration Advisory Board will meet the requirements of paragraph C, section 2705, Title 10 United States Code at the TRC. The Technical Review Committee initiate the action of the site with expeditiously deplete the National PLE by the Environmental Protection Agency with the completion criteria with requests to perform rehearsal detailing lists and special operable units appropriate. 6. The MMRP categories conduct the response of the actions that address military munitions, chemical residue munitions, activity, installation. For the BD and DR, the BD and DR program category response for the buildings used and since the October 17, 1986, may undertake a requirement demolition per building an integral part of the activity of the IRP and MMRP category response. Another AER funded with the BD and DR and program category for the response program buildings since September 17th, October 1986 may only be undertaken with specially authorized Assistant Deputy and Undersecretary of Defense Environmental Safety Occupational Health base realignment and closure cleanup program addressed for the installation designated for the closure realignment of the base closure legislation funded with the base closure account with the Youth Department of Defensive and Environmental Restoration Program Authority. Closing installation cleanup with the requirements consistent previously indicated with the IRP MMRP category requirements plus those closure related compliance with actions that are required for the property transfer the base closure base realignment cleanup program may be addressed by BD and BDR cleaning requirements on safe building structures since the October 17, 1986 will act with the integral parts of action of the IRP and MMRP category response. Army activities updating the base realignment and closure IPA annual, including ensure that the base realignment and closure cleanup activities comply with the Army Defense U.S. Secretary of Defense Policy Grant and for the fast track cleanups the base redevelopment realignment manual. So strive and transfer the base realignment and base realignment and closure property and product use compliance-related cleanup. The compliance-related cleanup actions to address contamination facilities oversee the contaminating results of operations that have occurred since October 1986 and Army active excessive special installation Army National Guard federally owned facility contamination now federally owned, federally supported by the Army National Guard facilities. The compliance cleanup projects are projects needed for the further investigation if necessary conduct the response action to address the contamination so the imminent substantial threat of the human health and the environmental undertake the compliance related cleanup projects when needed, addressing the following requirements: release the circular RCR corrective action with not eligible funding with the Department of Defense Management Guide to the Defensive Environmental Restoration Program. For example, the release the curved on or after October 17, 1986. Cleanup mandated under the authority of federal, state, and environmental laws that are not being addressed under the other cleanup programs. Release the hazardous waste treatment, storage, disposal facilities, and solid waste lands are undergoing the RCRA closure. Release from the RCRA underground storage tank if it was a service of the October 7th, 1986 Army contaminated beyond its installation boundary was necessary to protect the human health and environmental and are not eligible for the Defensive and Environmental Reparation Program. Contamination overseas installation according to the Department of Defense in Instruction 4715.8. Contamination non-federal owned, federal supported Army National Guard site, regardless of the date. Munition response. The response ranges composed when the after 30th 2002 response actions outside the boundaries operational range results of the range assessment program established in accordance with the Department of Defense Direction 4715L. Now, Department of Defense Environmental Restoration Program, Environmental Liability Assessment Installation, Army Command, Army Service Component Command, and Direct Reporting Units for Special Installation with the Program Budget Mission, Working Capable Funds, Resource Additional Defensive Environmental Restoration Program, the compliance with the cleanup, eligible release, special installation, eligible for the Army Defensive Environmental Restoration Program, with the defensive environmental requirements. Other, and formerly used defense sites. Other than the Defensive Environmental Restoration Program, the formerly used defense sites program, the just priorities were under the jurisdiction of the Secretary of Defense is owned by the lease and otherwise proposed by the United States, otherwise under the operational control of Secretary of Defense military components for the transfer of the Department of Defense control power to 17th October 1986. The funds program addressed the sites following program categories: the IRP, the MMRP, the BDR, BDMDR, also eligible for the former Department of Defense sites for the transfer of the October 17th, 1986. But they have completed with the findings determining the eligibility final inventory report action. Signed prior to October 30th, 2000, stating that the property of the funding at formerly used defense sites eligible that they were listed in the Restoration Management Information System as a formerly used defense site property prior to the September 30th, 2000. At the defense of U.S. Army Defense, U.S. Secretary of Defense, Environmental Safety and Occupational Health, established the formerly used defensive system program policy budget, regardless of which the military service formerly controlled the property of the Army as a kind of agent administrated with the formerly used defensive system site program, generally policy of management execution, formerly used defensive site programs provided with the Department of Defense management guidance for the Defensive Environmental Restoration Program, or the formerly used defensive system program chart of the Army Secretary, Army National and Innovation and Environment, Army's Chief Staff and Installation Management, respectively, and Secretary, Army Staff, the proponents formerly used defense program, U.S. Army Corps Engineering, responsible for management execution of the formerly used defense system program. Specifically, formerly used defensive programs, execution guidance procedure found with the U.S. Army Corps Engineering Regulation 203-1, Defensive State Memorandum Agreement, Cooperative Agreement, Department of Defense, Defensive State Memorandum Agreement, Cooperative Agreement Program involves state and territorial governments, environmental restoration, Department of Defense installation, including funded formerly used defensive systems properties. The Office of Secretary of Defense has given the Army authority to negotiate with the DSMOAs, as in the recommended DSMOAs, defensive site memorandums, and the ADUSA, U.S. Army Department of U.S. Support Under Secretary of Defense, ESONH, U.S. Army ACE, Executive Defensive State Memorandum and Cooperative Agreement Program at all military services. Authority for this program contains the Title 10 U.S. Code G701, which does which allows the Secretary of Defense to enter the agreements reimbursable based on the state and territories of the Department of Environmental Report Program, cleanup effort for the Department of Defense Intelligence. The defensive state of the memorandum and cooperative agreement program does not apply with the compliance for related cleanup. Specific criteria finding the information service the eligibility state reimbursement for the program contained with Part 2A8835 of the Title 57 Federal Register, dated 29th of June 1992. Funding of the Army contribution to defensive and state memorandum of agreement and cooperative agreement will provide with the Army with the environmental restoration or formerly used defensive systems of the BAC accounts. Memorandum of Understanding the Department of Defense and the Agency of the Toxic Substance Disease Register of the Department of Defense, and tied with the Memorandum of Understanding the Agency of Toxic Substances Disease Registry delineates responsibility procedure under which Agency of Toxic Substances Disease Registers of the Department of Defense will conduct activities in the circular with the memorandum of the understanding the single night will govern the relationship of the Department of Defense and the Agency for Toxic Supply Disease Registry, founding for the Agency for the Toxic Substance Relief of the Army related under the Memorandum of Understanding of the Department of Defense is provided with the Army for the Environmental Restoration A. Army Environmental Restoration F, the BCA accounts. Each military component founded with the Agency of Toxic Substance Disease Registry, found with the U.S. Army Environmental Restoration Program Guidance Manual Guidelines for the Coordination of Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, Liability Act, or Circular activities between the Agency of Toxic Substance Disease Registry, Department of Defense, additional information roles for the Agency of Toxic Substance Disease Register and Department of Defense components for the cleanup, DoD cleanup activities. For exemptions, the above guidance for the environmental cleanup does not apply with the to and contractor-owned contractor-operated facilities that are not real property controlled for the Army, properties that are not real properties that is owned or controlled otherwise under the jurisdiction of the Department of Defense that is third-party site. Responsive release occurs solely in the result of the action of war. Emergency response to cleanup with the relief, the routine operation management maintenance of an operating Army facility on site that does not become a cleanup project. Routine range maintenance, the sustaining activities of operational range. Environmental quality technology.